Hello and welcome to this week's Wisdom Wednesday on the Alter Your Health podcast. I'm Dr. Susanna Alter.
And I'm Dr. Ben.
And we're very excited to be here for another Wisdom Wednesday where we will discuss the topics of wisdom, innate peace, and innate well-being through the lens of mind, thought, and consciousness. And this week's topic is excuses.
Yeah, and it's a last minute topic, last minute idea. As is the case, we must admit, I hope it's okay that we're admitting that we don't think about this stuff a lot.
What we're going to talk about?
What we're going to talk about, how we're going to talk about it. And I guess just before we get into excuses, just so I can give you an excuse why we don't think about it, just to kind of, set the stage here. When we think about stuff, and I'm just speaking from my own experience, when I think about stuff, when I plan stuff, when I try to prepare, what tends to happen in my being is that I put a lot of energy upstairs in my head and my thinking, and things just bounce around, and this kind of echo chamber is created where I'm like shaking things up and trying to find something up here. And in doing so, I lose that openness that exists between myself and what's beyond me, the source of wisdom and inspiration and creativity that I otherwise have complete access to. I can have a tendency to block that off if I put my energy and try to control things. So that's my excuse. That's my excuse for not preparing these conversations.
No, it's a really good point. I mean, when you do plan and when you have an agenda that's been created from the intellect, it has a very different energy. We bring a very different energy to the call.
So,
and
we do have more of agenda and intellect and planning in our Medicinal Monday episode. We kind of put the outline and the structure a little bit, and then the intention is at least to then open up for sources of inspiration and creativity and fluidity to bring us into an organic conversation. But with regards to these Wisdom Wednesday episodes, it's kind of the opposite. It's kind of just pure creativity, pure wisdom, pure openness. At least that's the intention. So last minute topic of excuses. And the whole idea of excuse, to me, what that really means, and my definition, or what the whole idea of excuse means to me, is that we're blaming what's going on something outside of ourselves. If we're making an excuse, we're not taking responsibility. If we're not taking responsibility, we're dismissing our power and putting our power on wherever we're pointing our finger. And I guess, just to be honest, the idea of this topic came up because Suzanne and I this morning were pointing our finger at each other, and we do that a lot. And I don't think we're alone in doing that. I don't think we're alone in pointing our fingers at one another when we're upset, and I think that I have a history of pointing my finger outside a whole heck of a lot of times, like, ever since I was a little kid. And if you think about, if I think about being a little kid and being upset and throwing a temper tantrum or whatever, my mom or dad would say, "Hey, Ben, what's wrong?" And just the whole idea of what's wrong invites me to blame what's wrong on something else. It brings out the excuse that I will find within me. Oh, that's wrong. I want that. I want more of that. I want to play this. I want to do that. I want you to do that. And that's, just sets the stage for this epidemic of failing to take responsibility for our own experiences, for the totality of our own experience. Of course, a lot of people have an easier time taking responsibility for our experiences when things are going well. It's like, oh yeah, I did this. Oh yeah, I'm creating this. Oh yeah, I've got this awesome job. Oh yeah, I get to drive this cool car because I worked hard and I did this and I'm responsible for this. But then when, shit hits the fan and things aren't going our way, back to the excuse kind of paradigm, right?
Yeah, well, the topic of excuses is interesting because I feel like it takes the conversation of pointing the finger in a more kind of specific direction. Because what's interesting about excuse, when I think of someone saying an excuse, there's part of that person that's taking responsibility or acknowledging, like, oh, like, well, maybe my behavior was a little bit like not great, or I was late or whatever. We think of excuses for being late or excuses for
My dog ate the homework.
yeah, but let's just take the case of like an excuse for for maybe like yelling or for responding in a way that wasn't ideal. If someone were to respond saying like, well, yeah, I responded that way, but only because you blah 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 blah. So it's really taking half responsibility. Uh
I would argue and say that's not taking any
any
responsibility.
responsibility.
No.
Right, because you're still blaming one's response on something else.
Yeah, I don't, and that's where, I don't see that you can take anything other than full responsibility, right? If it's either all or nothing with responsibility.
Mhm.
If we're not taking full responsibility, we're not taking any responsibility.
Mhm.
And if we're not taking full responsibility, therefore we're generating some excuse. We're finding some excuse, and we all have them, right? What's the quote? Excuses are like assholes. We all have them, and they're all full of shit. Excuses are like assholes. I'm pretty sure I didn't just make that up. We all have them. And if we don't have one, it's really easy to find one. Like we can all find an excuse for anything. And while we can always find an excuse for anything, we can always also find our responsibility, like take responsibility and step into that. And that, I think, more often than not, is moving into a little resistance, because it's very, at least, in my experience, it can be very uncomfortable moving into that realm of taking responsibility and sacrificing and dismissing the excuses that are so easy to find and so easy to share. But the fact is that I know that my soul and my higher self, when aligned, what that means is that I am taking responsibility. I am never aligned with my highest self and delivering an excuse. That's just flat out fact for me. When I'm aligned with my highest self, when I'm aligned with my soul, that means taking responsibility. And that's my intention in life, is to act from and be more aligned with soul. So what that means is surrendering the asshole that I have. We all have, right? And it's easier said than done.
Yeah, it's interesting to consider just all the other types of excuses that one can make. There's excuses to other people, but what about the excuses we make to ourselves? Oh yeah, I haven't gotten around to this thing that I really want to do because XYZ. Oh yeah, I haven't taken charge of my health because of this and this. And it's interesting because what that brings up for me is kind of the gray area between kind of, I guess it's a very gray area, and that's why it's hard to articulate. But what I'm trying to articulate is the distinction between kind of holding oneself back because of excuses versus kind of waiting and trusting for inspiration to take action.
Well, I think that you're saying that it's a gray area, but I don't think it's a gray area at all.
Right. It feels gray. It feels gray, but you're
Maybe
right. It's not
maybe
gray.
when we're sitting here talking about it, it sounds gray. But the fact is, like, what I hear you saying is that sometimes when we're kind of waiting for inspiration and it's like, oh, I haven't done this yet just because I haven't been ready. And oh, I haven't started my healing journey just because I haven't been ready. Oh, I haven't started this exercise program just because I haven't been feeling ready. That is an excuse until it's not, right? That is an excuse until it's not, because and we're the only people who know that. We're the only people that know that. No one else outside in your life is going to have that bullshit detector other than you. Right. And because, yeah, we can hold ourselves to incredibly high standards and unrealistic expectations and be perfectionistic, but our soul is not a perfectionist. Our soul does not expect perfection from us 100% of the time. Our soul expects us to act from, identify with, and do our best based on that awareness of soul presence, at any given point in time. So I would say that, when the inspiration strikes, and then where we feel the inspiration, and then despite that feeling of inspiration, we sabotage it by coming up with some negative self-talk and excuse, and oh, maybe tomorrow, like, then we're getting into that murky territory where we're tapping into that asshole.
Yeah, well, what just occurred to me while you were talking and we're unpacking this topic of excuses is that excuses only come along with judgment because we're excusing something that we're judging as not good or wrong, right? We're excusing it. There's no need for an excuse if we know what we've done is in alignment with our
That's a good point.
true nature, right?
That's a good point.
Yeah. So what about that?
Yeah. Well, this brings me back to, you were talking about kind of the relationship that we have with ourselves and kind of the expectations and hopes for ourselves. This brings me back to relationships with others. Like sometimes Susanna gets upset because of I say something and she hears it and she thinks that I'm being mean or like my tone of voice is bad, but I don't see it or feel it or recognize it at all. And therefore I don't feel the need to make an excuse or
apologize.
or apologize for that matter. Because I in genuine, like, heart of hearts, don't feel any wrongdoing inside of myself.
Mhm.
So there are no excuses, there are no apologies. But sometimes there are, right? And when there are, I need to be honest and acknowledge that and own up to that and take responsibility for that. And then, of course, in relationship, things are, of course, always going to be a little bit more complicated due to the fact that there's two separate realities coexisting. So Susanna's reality and my reality, while probably very rarely fully aligned, I need to acknowledge and respect Susanna's reality, and Susanna needs to acknowledge and respect my reality, or at least acknowledge and respect that I have a reality that may be unique from hers. And
I don't need to, but if I don't respect your separate reality, then
you need to take responsibility for the consequences of not that.
Yeah. Well,
Is that what you
really, I
mean?
mean, no one needs to do anything. We're all
Yeah.
human. we're all human, and we all give into our own stories and realities. But if we forget that each individual is having their own experience in reality, then it's really easy to take things personally and to misinterpret things, and to just kind of spiral in our thinking.
And to then be given an opportunity to take responsibility, and I guess due to the fact that we didn't really prepare this conversation, we have no plan of how to close it or wrap it up or tie it together. So anything coming to you right now, Susanna? Or do you feel like you've said all that needs to be shared in this brief episode?
Well, it's just interesting, just this topic of excuses, because we actually, like you said, we didn't prepare, but I feel like I'm seeing excuses in a very new way now, because well, first of all, I think excuses happen without us being aware of them all the time, right? But I think it's also really, really interesting to acknowledge that with the excuse, there's always going to be some level of judgment there, because we're excusing the wrongdoing, right? And so I think it'll be interesting moving forward now to be aware of when I find myself making excuses. And I invite everyone else to do the same, because it is kind of, once again, that biofeedback that, okay, we're judging something. What are we judging? Are we judging ourselves as not being good enough, not being proactive enough? Are we judging a certain behavior, how we responded in a certain interaction with someone? And are there places where we can take greater responsibility? Are we pointing fingers? Or is there nothing to be excused after all? And so I think it's an interesting topic to unpack. And
we did
I
that.
feel like there's even more, but
There's
I think it's
more.
a good time to say goodbye as well.
Before we dig ourselves in a deeper ditch. No,
are you making excuses?
I think that you bring up a good point, like just that invitation to be more mindful and aware of when we feel ourselves making an excuse and what judgments are around that. And is there beneath that or within that an opportunity to stand in full responsibility, and how we can do that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Oh, someone get a haircut? We just got a comment about
whose hair?
Not mine. Mine's just a little bit curly.
Mine's just behind my shoulders.
Maybe next week. Maybe that's a hint that I'm due for a haircut. But anyways, thanks for tuning in, and we look forward to seeing you guys or being with you guys next episode of the Alter Your Health podcast.
Yes. Bye for now.